Somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left.
Antifa's an idea, not an organization.
Oh, you got it.
Not militia.
As alleged in the indictment, members of Defend the Atlanta Forest flatly reject the rule of law.
And that the data concludes that they didn't work in the first go-round.
Antifa, which is an idea, is linked to a RICO charge now in the state of Georgia. Similarly, the same Fulton County, Georgia, that was now prosecuting Donald Trump. Also, Dr. Fauci confronted on CNN, of all places, over masks. And will the government shut down now that Congress is back in session? I sure hope so. All that and more coming up on this episode of Daily Caller Live. Thanks so much for tuning in. Daily Caller Live starts right now.
Here we go!
That might be the only brown guy on earth named Jobob.
That is actually her name, Jobob.
Live from the dingy bunker that is completely cut off from the outside world, except for you fine folks. My name is Jobob. This is Daily Caller Live. Thanks so much for tuning in on today. It is a Wednesday, September 6th, year of our Lord 2023. Some fascinating things happened yesterday. Remember how a bunch of January 6ers, whatever you want to call them, got the book thrown at them, while a bunch of cities just burned in 2020, 2021, and even parts of 2022, and nobody did anything. Well, finally, the Attorney General in Georgia has issued RICO charges against some Antifa-linked groups. But of course, Antifa is not real. Antifa is an idea. It's not a real group and not a real organization. That, according to President Joe Biden during the debates. I wanted to play that clip really before we get into kind of what is happening. So let's do that. Let's play that first. This is the part of the debates between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. This is the first debate, maybe the third debate, second. Well, anyways, watch this. This is, again, astonishing that somebody actually, and I think he actually believes this, that somebody believes this and said it on national TV. Check it out.
Somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left, because this is not a right-wing problem. This is a left.
FBI director.
This is a left-wing problem.
White supremacist. Antifa's an idea, not an organization.
Oh, you got it.
Not militia. That's what his FBI. FBI director said.
Well, then you know what?
No, we're done, sir. We're moving on to the next. We're moving.
When a bat hits you over the head, that's not an idea.
Everybody in your administration tells you the truth has a bad idea.
Can I tell you what?
All right. So you may remember that moment when a bunch of people who have been paying attention to, again, all of the crazy stuff going on, especially with Antifa, were like, what the hell are you talking about? It's just an idea. The idea didn't burn down the grocery store. The idea didn't shatter the windows in all of the downtown areas. The idea isn't rioting in the streets. The idea didn't take over an entire city block in Seattle. What? But this, just in breaking yesterday, this is from Andy No's Twitter feed. Andy No, if you don't know, is kind of like on the front lines of this whole Antifa thing. I think he reports out of Portland. Said this: for the first time, a network of violent Antifa-linked suspects have been indicted on RICO charges, plus terrorism, money laundering, and arson. 61 Stop Cop City suspects, many already charged with domestic terrorism previously, have been indicted by the same Fulton County grand jury that indicted Trump and his associates. The suspects allegedly were involved in a number of attacks across the U.S. And here's where it gets interesting. A nonprofit called Atlanta Solidarity Fund /Network for Strong Communities allegedly was used to funnel cash around to militants. The indictment is over 100 pages long. That is the missing kind of key, I feel like, that has been with this Antifa thing. Because when you say organized, it's tough. It is tough. I'll be honest with you. It is tough to nail down the top of the organization for Antifa. You kind of see people going under this Antifa flag and Antifa banner. And so there is I don't want to say that. It's tough to nail it down. Having said that, it is always been weird that bricks randomly show up, riot gear randomly shows up. People who don't live in the area somehow manage to travel to this location, get accommodations in this location. Say, for example, in Portland's a bad idea because a lot of them live in Portland, but in, I don't know, Middletown, USA, when an Antifa riot shows up, how do these people just here, right? It's hard to nail down, but at the same time, you have to question, are people paying for these rioters to get here? How does that work? Well, it turns out that the indictment in Georgia is alleging that this nonprofit and Atlanta Solidarity Fund / Network for Strong Communities has been used to funnel cash around the country to Antifa. I almost said migrants for some reason. I'm looking at a map. The 61 indicted in Fulton County are from all over the place. Louisiana, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, Connecticut, Maine, Maryland, Ohio, Tennessee, Indiana. I should have just stopped. There's no reason to list all of these, but now that I'm halfway through, I'm going to keep going. Michigan, Wisconsin, Missouri, Louisiana, I don't know if I already said that, Nebraska, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, Nevada, and California, which obviously makes it eligible for RICO. But the crazy thing about this is that it looks like the prosecutors in Georgia are going to be able to tie a hierarchy or at least a money channeling system to a lot of the riots that took place around the country. Now, whether or not they're successful remains to be seen, but this is, is this the Attorney General himself or is it the local guy? This is one of the guys from the press conference yesterday talking about who they're going after. So I think specifically they're focusing in on this group. What do they call them? The Georgia Protect Georgia Woods or Forests or something like that. And it's this new kind of autonomous zone, kind of the same thing that happened in Seattle with Chaz, but kind of in the forests of Georgia. So that's what he's talking about. But I want you to listen to this. It's rather long, and we'll break it up a little bit. But check this out. This is fascinating.
As alleged in the indictment, members of Defend the Atlanta Forest flatly reject the rule of law and do not recognize governmental authority. A sign reading, quote, "You are now leaving the USA," end quote, was featured at the training site and also in social media and blog posts about the group. Similar to the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, also known as the Chaz, that was created and occupied by anarchists in 2020 in Seattle, Washington, we contend that members of Defend the Atlanta Forest unlawfully occupied the land in Atlanta where the training center is set to be built.
Okay. So remember there was this big training center. Remember there was riots. This was probably a couple months ago now. A bunch of riots in Atlanta at where a police training facility was attempted to be built. So that's what he's talking about there. Let me keep playing his spiel before we get into some comments. I'm reading through. I'd like to get to some of these. So continue watching.
They lived illegally in and around the trees on this property for nearly 2 years. In order to barricade the site, we assert that the defendants set sharp traps designed to injure anyone who might approach them, including law enforcement officers. As further alleged in the indictment, the defendants used incendiary devices, such as Molotov cocktails, large mortar-style fireworks, and were in the process of constructing a rudimentary explosive device. In one incident, we contend that members of Defend the Atlanta Forest trapped an unsuspecting civilian who'd approached the area and held him at gunpoint. As alleged in the indictment, the Defend the Atlanta Forest is financially supported by the Network for Strong Communities. While the Network for Strong Communities portrays itself as a legitimate, charitable, social justice organization, we contend that this group is operating several bank accounts, commingling funds from various causes, and raising money to establish and maintain the autonomous zone within the forest. As a result, thousands of good faith donors gave millions of their own money to a certain charitable cause, and their funds instead were spent on ammunition, surveillance materials, and a drone, among other out-of-scope items.
Holy cow. Isn't that nuts? So yeah, is it crowdsourced? Who knows? But the good thing, I guess, is that when you receive a donation for a nonprofit, all of that stuff is tracked. So I would imagine the prosecutors in this particular case would be able to backtrack all of the donations. And as somebody said it in the comments here, let me see if I can get to it. Soros funded? Question mark? Oh, she didn't put a question mark, but I'm putting a question mark. Yeah, they can link that back if, in fact, there is money coming from the big bad lefties. So yeah, that's going to be fascinating to see this play out. I am curious to see if what happens to it. It is kind of interesting, poetic maybe in a way, that it's coming out of the same county that indicted Donald Trump for his election stuff, which is all just crazy. But I feel like there's a couple different points that I kind of want to point out here in this. So yesterday, too, coincidence that it was the same day? Probably not. Well, probably. But I don't know. It's just kind of interesting. Enrique Tarrio, the leader of the Proud Boys organization, was sentenced to 22 years in prison. Now, the reason I bring that up and the reason that I think that is interesting is because it is. Look, I'm not a huge fan of the Proud Boys and their whole thing. Let's get that out of the way at the onset. Not the biggest fan of Enrique Tarrio or the Proud Boys. Having said that, it is kind of interesting that they were labeled white supremacists by a lot of your lefty news outlets and Democrats as a whole in their campaigns, run by, I think that guy is Cuban and black, which I don't know. I just thought that was kind of interesting and funny. But all of that being said, we can hold two thoughts in our head at once. Not a big fan. And also, it is fascinating. The expeditiousness of the trial, sentencing, all of that sort of stuff for, well, I say expeditiousness. It's crazy how much focus is on the January 6th stuff and not on this stuff. I think that's the only real kind of tie between the two, really, is that it's fascinating how much scrutiny has been put on January 6th, which again was bad. Nobody's saying that it wasn't bad. But for some reason, all of this stuff flew under the radar, and it took a state to finally bring down or attempt to bring down what has been a huge problem for way longer than the January 6th thing has been around. Speaking of the January 6th, this guy, oh geez, there's a lot, not a lot, but just some interesting stuff that I want to get to here too. Well, actually, let's go to this first. This is interesting. So I just want to play this clip. This is a bunch of protesters, probably not tied with Antifa, but as we're talking about January 6th sentencing and all of the prolonged trials and all that sort of stuff from that, it is interesting to kind of juxtapose it with this. This is, I'm realizing, way more scattered than I thought it would be. But this is a clip from people storming the Capitol, in my opinion, to protest the appointment of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. And as you can see, the fine was not 22 years in prison. Again, I'm not saying that they were the same thing. The Terrio guy and these crazy ladies, yeah, clearly different. But are they this different? Just check out this storming of the Capitol to protest Brett Kavanaugh's appointment just a couple years ago.
We believe Debbie Ramirez. We believe Dr. Ford. We believe Nina Hill. We believe Debbie Ramirez. We believe Dr. Ford. We will not go back. We will
not sure where this was specifically in the Capitol, but in my opinion, that's not necessarily as bad. I'm not going to say that this was as bad as breaking the windows and storming into the Capitol or planning to go storm into the Capitol. But at the same time, the fine for a bunch of these, again, crazy ladies was $35, and juxtapose that to people who are getting decades in federal prison for January 6th. Now, again, I am not saying that they are exactly the same. Nobody's saying that. However, it is interesting the way that the different sides seem to be treated, especially when it comes to protesting what they believe. Thought this was interesting too with the Enrique Tarrio thing, and you may not be following this, but I just thought it was kind of interesting going on. Rob Reiner, who's the director of movies that I like, it's irritating that this particular guy is so actively angry on Twitter. But said this: the leader of the Proud Boys was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison for violently storming the Capitol in an attempt to overthrow the government. He would have never been at the Capitol had it not been for Donald Trump. You do the math. Part of the reason why that's funny is because of this. This subtext to the tweet said this: readers add context. On Twitter/X, this tweet contains a factual error. While Enrique Tarrio was sentenced to 22 years in prison, it was not for violently storming the U.S. Capitol. As ABC correctly reports, Tarrio wasn't present in Washington on the day of the attack. The guy who Rob Reiner says would never have been there if it weren't for Donald Trump, who was colluding with the Proud Boys, according to this Yahoo, neglected to remember or didn't know that the guy he's talking about was picked up by the FBI, I think, 2 days prior, and was not even in the District of Columbia during the riots. Nevertheless, they continue to tie people together. And so this is... I apologize. I thought this would be more cohesive, like we'd go from the Antifa people to the Proud Boys guy to the storming the Capitol during Kavanaugh to this guy, and it would tie in together. It just didn't work that way in my head, or it didn't work that way hourly. It worked that way in my head. So if you're still following along with this, congratulations. I'm not really even following. But I think this is the last point that I'd like to make that is kind of interesting, that Joanna pointed out. Convenient election year. She was talking about Antifa, I think, specifically. But I thought it was interesting and should be worth pointing out that the Proud Boys dude was indicted, went through his trial, and now is sentenced, all before Donald Trump goes to trial or is really even indicted. I mean, he's been indicted, but it wasn't like that was 2 years ago. It was like last week, 2 weeks ago, through, I don't know, however many indictments. What I'm getting at here is effectively lefties are arguing that they did the same thing. I would not agree, but they're trying to say that Donald Trump and Enrique Tarrio are one and the same. They contacted each other. They planned together. They organized in the same mind. Which, again, I don't believe is true. But if that's the case, why then is the Tarrio guy already through the entire process and Donald Trump is just starting his process during an election year? I think the Babylon Bee had a hilarious headline. I'm not sure if it was the Babylon Bee, but somebody said, Donald Trump to be tried for election interference just in time to interfere with the election. Seems kind of hinky to me. Anyways, like I said, I thought that would tie in together a little bit better, but sometimes things work out in your head and they don't work out on paper, on digital. So moving on, wanting to get to this, creator of COVID, Dr. Anthony Fauci, is back on the scene after a long time in hiatus, enjoying his retirement paid for by the taxpayer. What does he make? I think he's the highest paid person in federal government that isn't a football coach. But he retired just in time to dodge all of the questions of the fallout of his policies. But now that there's a new COVID variant, he's back on the scene and saying the same ish again and again and again. However, I wanted to play this clip because now that we have some pretty definitive evidence of the contrary of what he had been saying for a very long time, even lefty channels like CNN are calling him out on it. I wasn't expecting to see this again on CNN, because I don't know that he would go on Fox unless it was like Cavuto's show. On CNN, they called him out on the mask mandate stuff, and I thought it was entertaining as heck, and I wanted to play it for you. It's rather long, and there's really not a ton of commentary to be done afterward, but check this out. Thought it was fascinating. Watch this.
I would hope that if, in fact, we get to the point where the volume of cases is such and organizations like the CDC recommend, CDC doesn't mandate anything, recommends that people wear masks, I would hope that they abide by the recommendation and take into account the risk to themselves and to their families. And again, we're not talking about forcing anybody to do anything.
Totally understood. There is a perception out there by many, how many I don't know, that they don't work and that the data concludes that they didn't work in the first go-round. Respond to that on masks.
Yeah, well, that's not so. When you're talking about at the population level, that the data are less strong than knowing that if you look on a situation as an individual protecting themselves or protecting them from spreading it, there's no doubt that masks work. Different studies give different percentages of advantage of wearing it, but there's no doubt that the weight of the studies, and there have been many studies, indicate the benefit of wearing masks.
I'm going to refer to one of them. You've heard about it before. I heard about it from a number of radio callers. Brett Stevens in The Times talked about Cochrane. Put that on the screen. The most rigorous and comprehensive analysis of scientific studies conducted on the efficacy of masks for reducing the spread of respiratory illness, including COVID-19, was published last month. Its conclusions, said Tom Jefferson, the Oxford epidemiologist who is the lead author, were unambiguous. There is just no evidence that masks, make any difference. He told the journalist Mayanne Demasi, full stop. But wait, hold on. What about the N95 masks as opposed to the lower quality surgical or cloth masks? Makes no difference. None of it, he said. Well, what about the studies that initially persuaded policymakers to impose mask mandates? They were convinced by non-randomized studies, flawed observational studies. How do we get beyond that finding of that particular review?
Yeah, but there are other studies, Michael, that show at an individual level for individual. When you're talking about the effect on the epidemic or the pandemic as a whole, the data are less strong. But when you talk about as an individual basis of someone protecting themselves or protecting themselves from spreading it to others, there's no doubt that there are many studies that show that there is an advantage. When you took at the broad population level, like the Cochrane study, the data are less firm with regard to the effect on the overall pandemic. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about an individual's effect on their own safety. That's a bit different than the broad population level.
Did anyone? Oh my gosh. Hold on. I want to play the clip. I want to get his face on here.
How do we get beyond that finding?
Look at his face. Look at his. Just look, the evidence seems to be overwhelming that masks didn't do a dang thing. And then the spin at the end. Say what you want about Dr. Fauci, but two things are true. The man creates a heck of a disease. If you need a disease created, Anthony Fauci is your man. And two, he can spin a room. Did you hear the ending part of that? He's like, well, masks, specifically, broad strokes, when you look at all of the people, which is what policy is created for. When you look at all the people, yeah, of course they didn't work. The data is different. It's not so concrete, and it shows that they didn't work, and that kind of makes sense. But we're talking about the individuals here. It worked for the individuals, and therefore, when it comes to protecting your own personal safety, I mean, if you're not really like into things and you're just kind of listening to that, you're like, okay, yeah, he handled that pretty well. No, he didn't. He effectively said, look, if you look at 100 people and you take the averages, it didn't work. Everybody agrees that it didn't work. But if you pick one particular individual out of those 100 people and they wear a mask, they will feel like it worked and therefore it worked. That's the argument that he just made. And a bunch of your COVIDians are probably sitting there watching it. Oh, yeah, makes sense. Yeah, the data are inconclusive. I also don't like that. I don't like the fact that data is plural. The data are. That doesn't sound right in my head. I don't know if that bugs any of you people, but I don't know, it bugs me. But yes, the COVID creator, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who creates a mean disease if you ever need one. I wonder, maybe that's something I should pitch. Maybe that'd be a funny sketch. If we end up making it, I'll refer back to this part of the video, but that would be a hilarious sketch. You have a bunch of evil masterminds in a lair saying we need to devise a disease, a bioweapon that'll wipe out huge numbers of people and be with the population through eternity. What can we do to create this disease? And one of them suggests, we need Anthony Fauci. Can we get him? And then they like, he's the best, but can we afford him? I don't know. Maybe that'll be a funny sketch. Sounds funny in my head. But let's see. Anything in the comment section that's interesting? I always thought this too. Anna says masks are like wearing a petri dish. Remember when they were like forcing it? I live in California, so they were forcing it for a lot longer than a lot of other people in various parts of the country. Thankfully, the place that I live in is pretty red, and we're like, yeah, we're done with this sooner than the rest of the state. But when it was required to get groceries, which again is so stupid, and in hindsight, yeah, you shouldn't have done it, but it was what it was. I had like one dinky like little paper mask thing that was in the side little compartment in the door in my car. And it was the same one. I didn't change it out for like 6 months. I just kind of, haphazardly threw it on my head and walked in. I would imagine wearing that mask was worse for my health just from the fact that it was picking up bacteria in the slot car door. That was probably substantially worse than not wearing, not probably, definitely was substantially worse than not wearing a mask at all. But I digress. Anyways. Last thing to bring up briefly. Is the government headed for a shutdown? I sure hope so. Congress is back in session. And in order to continue funding the government, Republicans are saying to the president, you have to fix this, this, or this. We won't vote for the next funding package to fund the government, which I don't think goes far enough. I think they should just say, yeah, shut it down. Get rid of all the crap that we don't need. If the federal government can be shut down, why do we have it in the first place? Obviously, I'm not talking about the entirety of the federal government, but the non-essential workers that get furloughed when the government shuts down, why do we have them? If they're non-essential, if we don't absolutely need them, what's the point in having them? And as for companies, like think about it as a company. Do companies have non-essential workers? No. Absolutely not. Hey, Jim over in accounting hasn't done anything in a while. He's completely non-essential, but we keep him on the payroll just because we like him. That doesn't happen in real life. So anyways, the government could be headed toward another shutdown, in which case non-essential workers will be furloughed. And I would say to Republicans, hold out, let the government shut down. All of the non-essential workers that work for the federal government, go ahead and fire them. What do we need them for? But that's going to be a talking point the next couple weeks is, will the government shut down? And then the Biden administration will trot out, well, teachers are not going to get paid and old folks won't be able to get the care that they need. Of course, that is not... The threat against the shutdown is always, if we shut down, these people will be harmed. Firefighters, police officers, teachers. Which is the dumbest way of looking at a government shutdown. And it's a political tactic. The people in charge, in this case the Biden administration, will say, do you not care about the teachers, the police officers, and the firefighters? I was like, well, you don't have to dock their pay first. You don't have to make them the target. There's so many other government programs that we don't care about, don't need, don't even know about. Why don't you go after them? Or say, look, all of these people are furloughed. Don't restrict money from the things that you need. That's like, all right, I lost my job, but we do have a pretty substantial amount of savings. And rather than cutting back on Netflix, going out to eat, entertainment stuff, we're going to stop paying the mortgage. That's the first thing to go when we run on hard financial times. Now, nobody would do that. And so when the Biden administration inevitably says, Republicans trying to make sure we have this, that, or else they'll shut down the government, don't want teachers and firefighters and police officers or old folks to get their health care. I don't know why Joe Biden sounds like Bill Clinton here. When he says all that sort of stuff, just know that, well, you don't have to cut those first. That would be the dumbest possible thing to do. But anyways. That'll do it for us today. Appreciate you sticking around, tuning in. Anything that we didn't get to specifically? There's some climate change stuff, but meh. Like I've been saying the last, couple weeks, we'll see you tomorrow, but also probably, if you haven't already, give me a follow on any of your social media platforms. Just type in JOBOB. Pretty much anywhere on social media, you'll be able to find me. Getter, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. I need to go to Getter more. Use Getter more. I know we stream on here every day. If you're watching on Getter, I opened it up on the app just now. I should. 99 plus notifications. I gotta hop on this more. But yeah, I got sucked into a thing there. If you haven't given me a follow on any of the social media platforms, Fallbrook, California, Van Buren, Arkansas, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Twin Falls, Idaho are on the comedy tour calendar. So pick up tickets wherever you buy. Well, at the social media platforms, you can buy them there. But yeah, we will see you tomorrow, same time, same place. Probably, like I've been saying the last couple weeks, show's kind of in flux considering newborns commandeer a lot of your time. But anyway, see you then. God bless America.